It begins in silence. A world of white under a pale, indifferent sun. This is Antarctica, the last continent. It is less a place on our world than it is a world of its own, an ice planet tethered to our green Earth, a ghost at the bottom of the globe. The sheer scale of it is a challenge to the human mind. An expanse of nearly 5.5 million square miles, a desert of crystal so vast and so empty it redefines our understanding of solitude. Here, 90% of our planet's freshwater is locked away in a sheet of ice that, in places, is nearly 3 miles thick. It is the coldest, the driest, and the highest continent on Earth, an environment so extreme, so utterly hostile to life, that our most advanced space agencies use its frozen valleys to simulate missions to Mars. It is, for all intents and purposes, the end of the world. A final, unwritten page in the atlas of human endeavor. But our perception of this place, our entire experience of it, is just a snapshot in deep time. We see a wasteland, a monolithic void in the human story. We see an ending. But what if we're wrong? What if what we are looking at is not an empty stage, but a buried one? What if this eternal winter is not a beginning, but an epitaph, a final, frozen testament to a story we have long forgotten? We think of history as something written in stone and sand, in the ruins of Rome or the temples of the Nile. We hunt for our past in the dust of jungles and the warmth of fertile crescents. We have never thought to look for it here, under the crushing, silent weight of the polar ice. We have assumed that this continent has no history, no memory. But the ice is a keeper of secrets. It preserves everything it touches. And beneath its placid, frozen surface, it may be holding the greatest secret of all. The first clue is an impossible artifact. It sits not in a museum of ancient mysteries, but in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a quiet testament to a world that should not exist. It is a map, drawn on gazelle skin in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. It is a stunningly accurate chart of the Atlantic Ocean and its coastlines. The shores of Western Europe and North Africa are there, as is the coast of Brazil, all rendered with a precision that is astonishing for its time. But it is not what the map shows that is so remarkable, it is what it claims to show. In the south, where the ocean should continue its endless churn, there is land. A coastline, emerging from the bottom of the map, that charts the northern shores of a great southern continent. This is Queen Maud Land. We know it today as the coast of Antarctica. Yet, on the Piri Reis map, this land is not covered in a 3-mile-thick sheet of ice. It is shown with startling detail, bays, inlets, and perhaps even river mouths. It is depicted as it would look without the ice. And herein lies the paradox that has baffled historians for decades. The continent of Antarctica would not be officially sighted by human eyes until 1820, 3 centuries after Piri Reis drew his chart. The subglacial topography, the actual land hidden beneath that permanent, crushing ice cap, would remain a complete mystery until the advent of seismic sounding technology in the mid-20th century. So how could a 16th-century admiral, working from a library in Constantinople, possibly have known what was there? Piri Reis himself gave us a clue. He wrote in the map's margins that it was not his own original work, but a compilation, drawn from some 20 older source maps, some of which, he claimed, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, and others even more ancient. If it were just one map, it could be dismissed as a fluke. A bizarre coincidence. An artist's fanciful interpretation of the mythical Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, that geographers had long theorized must exist to balance the continents of the north. But it is not just one map. In 1531, the French mathematician Orontius Phineas published a world map that is, in some ways, even more puzzling. It shows the entire Antarctic continent, not just a sliver of coastline. And again, it appears to be largely free of ice. The overall shape is shockingly accurate, and the map depicts mountain ranges and flowing rivers, features that lie today under miles of frozen water. Decades later, the legendary Gerardus Mercator, the father of modern cartography, would draw his own maps showing the same southern continent. These were not fringe thinkers, these were the giants of their age. And they all seemed to be drawing upon a common, and now lost, source of information. The conventional explanation is that these mapmakers simply made a mistake. That they misinterpreted the newly discovered coastlines of South America and Tierra del Fuego, stretching them into a vast, imaginary continent. But could such a mistake be repeated with such consistency, by the greatest minds in cartography, working across different countries and different decades? Could a series of guesses and errors just happen to produce a coastline that aligns so well with the subglacial landmass we've only recently discovered? Or is there another possibility? A possibility so profound it would force us to rewrite not just the history of exploration, but the history of humanity itself. Are these maps mistakes? Or are they copies? Faded echoes of a knowledge that belongs to a much older, forgotten chapter of the human story? Are they charts from a time before the freeze, a time when Antarctica was green and temperate, left behind by a culture that could navigate the world's oceans and chart its shorelines with a skill we are only just beginning to appreciate? It's a question that feels like it belongs in science fiction, but it is posed by these very real, very tangible artifacts. They demand an answer. Before our own civilization ever learned to write its name, before the pyramids were built, before the first cities rose in Mesopotamia, before we existed, was Antarctica home to a thriving, lost empire? To entertain the idea of a lost world, we don't have to leap into the realm of pure speculation. We don't need ancient maps or controversial theories, not at first. All we need is to listen to the story the Earth itself tells us. To find the truth of a green Antarctica, we must peel back not just the ice, but the thin veneer of the present. We must travel back in time, not thousands of years, but tens of millions, to an age when the very face of our planet was unrecognizable. An age when Antarctica was not an exile at the frozen bottom of the world, but an integral part of a colossal southern supercontinent. This was the world of Gondwana. A single, colossal heartbeat of land that included the familiar shapes of modern-day South America, Africa, India, and Australia. And nestled among them, acting as a keystone in this great arch of continents, was Antarctica. It was not at the pole, but in a more temperate latitude, connected to its neighbors. Its climate was not dictated by an isolating, freezing ocean, but by its place within a global ecosystem. For over 100 million years, during the age of the dinosaurs and long after, Antarctica was a land of life. It was a world of verdant plains, of sprawling forests, and of flowing rivers. We know this not through conjecture, but through the irrefutable evidence written in stone. The first dispatches from this lost world came in the form of fossils. In 1912, on the Beardmore Glacier, Captain Scott's doomed polar expedition found what they knew to be a profound scientific treasure. It was the fossilized impression of a leaf, a message in a stone that spoke of a different time. It belonged to Glossopteris, a type of seed fern that formed vast forests across Gondwana. Since then, the discoveries have piled up, painting an ever-richer portrait of this forgotten ecosystem. Paleobotanists have unearthed entire fossilized forests, tree stumps still rooted in the ground where they stood 200 million years ago. They have found evidence of towering conifers, lush ferns, and even, from a later period, flowering plants related to the magnolias and beeches that grace our world today. And where there are forests, there is animal life. The petrified logs and fossilized leaves are not the only ghosts to emerge from the Antarctic rock. For millions of years, this land was a kingdom of dinosaurs. Paleontologists have found the bones of swift, two-legged predators, and the heavy vertebrae of colossal, long-necked titanosaurs, plant-eaters whose footsteps would have shaken the forest floor. They have found the remains of armor-plated ankylosaurs, living tanks that browsed on the polar vegetation. This was no barren wasteland, it was a functioning, thriving, and dynamic ecosystem, as rich and complex as any on Earth at the time. Even after the asteroid struck and the age of dinosaurs came to a fiery end, life in Antarctica did not cease. The continent became a cradle for a new kind of life, a lost world of mammals. For millions of years during the Eocene epoch, the continent was home to a strange and unique collection of creatures, including relatives of modern marsupials, linking its biological story to that of Australia. It was a world of possibility, a vast evolutionary laboratory teeming with life, basking in a climate that was, at times, almost subtropical. The evidence is unambiguous. The continent we know as an icon of ice was, for the vast majority of its recent geological history, a paradise of life. But this temperate paradise held a strange secret, a consequence of its high-latitude position on the globe. For months at a time, the sun would never set, bathing the forests in continuous, low-angled daylight. And for the months that followed, the sun would never rise, plunging the world into a long, cold, polar night. The plants and animals that lived here were unique, adapted to a cycle of extremes that exists almost nowhere on Earth today. The trees were likely deciduous, dropping their leaves to conserve energy during the long winter darkness. The animals would have had to adapt as well, perhaps by hibernating through the dark months, or by possessing large eyes to see in the perpetual twilight. It was a world of spectacular resilience. But no paradise lasts forever. As the tectonic plates continued their slow, inexorable dance, the world began to change. Around 50 million years ago, Antarctica's first tether was cut as it tore away from Australia, which began its long drift northward. Then, around 30 million years ago, the final, crucial separation occurred. South America broke away, opening a deep-water channel between the continents, the Drake Passage. With this final act of geological separation, Antarctica was utterly and completely isolated from the rest of the world for the first time. And in that isolation, a monster was born in the sea. With no land masses to obstruct it, a new ocean current formed, swirling around the now solitary continent. We call it the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. It is the most powerful current on Earth, a colossal moat of freezing water that forever cut Antarctica off from the warm currents flowing from the equator. It was a thermal fortress, an icy shield that repelled all warmth. It was the geological equivalent of a refrigerator door slamming shut on an entire continent. The effect was catastrophic and, in geological terms, almost instantaneous. Temperatures plunged. The slow creep of mountain glaciers accelerated into a relentless continental advance. The great southern forests died, the rivers froze, and the vibrant animal life vanished. Slowly, inexorably, the green world was buried. The paradise was entombed beneath a sheet of ice that grew to be miles thick. The science is clear. The stage was set. A warm, vibrant, and habitable world existed at the bottom of our planet for 100 million years. A world that disappeared, but which lies perfectly preserved beneath the ice. The landmass shown on those ancient maps was real. The only question is, did anyone, or anything, take the stage before the final curtain of ice came down? The green world of Antarctica is gone, buried under a tomb of ice so thick and so complete that it seems to defy all investigation. Direct evidence of any lost civilization would be locked away, seemingly forever, beyond our reach. We cannot dig for it. We cannot search for its ruins on foot. For a century, this simple, brutal fact has been the end of the conversation. But the tools of the 21st century have given us new eyes. We no longer have to touch the land to see it. We can now peer through the ice from the heavens, using technology to map the ghost of a continent, and in doing so, we have found things that are difficult to explain. Things that whisper of another story. The first whispers came from satellite photographs. As high-resolution imagery of the continent became available, analysts and amateur researchers began noticing strange formations. In the Ellsworth mountain range, one of the few places where the bones of the continent pierce through the ice sheet, a series of peaks were identified with an uncanny resemblance to something utterly out of place, pyramids. One, in particular, stands as a lonely sentinel, a dark, four-sided spire of rock rising from the ice. Its geometry is startling. Its faces are remarkably flat, its ridgelines unnervingly straight. When viewed from the right angle, its silhouette is a near-perfect echo of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And it is not alone. Others in the region share this strange, seemingly artificial geometry. The official geological explanation is simple and elegant. These are not man-made structures, but natural rock formations known as nunataks, or more specifically, glacial horns. They are the result of millions of years of erosion, carved into shape by the convergence of glaciers on multiple sides of a single mountain. Frost and ice act as nature's stonemasons, cleaving away rock to leave behind these sharp, pyramidal peaks. It is a textbook geological process, seen in mountain ranges all over the world, from the Matterhorn in the Alps to Mount Thielsen in Oregon. This is the accepted science. This is the rational explanation. But is it the only one? Look again at the precision, at the symmetry. Proponents of a lost history ask, is nature truly so precise? Do the random forces of ice and erosion really conspire to create multiple structures with four flat faces and a pointed apex, all in the same remote mountain range? Or are we seeing the signature of an intelligence, the handiwork of a culture that understood sacred geometry, now weathered and scoured by millennia of polar winds, but still recognizable to a trained eye? Are these the works of nature mimicking architecture, or are they the ruins of a great architecture being slowly reclaimed by nature? Without being able to stand at their base, to search for tool marks or foundational stones, the question remains tantalizingly open. If the pyramids are a visual anomaly, the next clue is an invisible one, a ghost in the deep earth detected by a force we cannot see. In 2006, NASA satellites designed to measure the Earth's gravitational field were mapping Antarctica. They found something astonishing buried deep beneath the eastern ice sheet, in a region known as Wilkes Land. It was a massive gravity anomaly, a plug of dense material in the planet's crust, hundreds of miles across. The mainstream scientific theory is that this is the scar of a colossal impact, a crater more than twice the size of the Chicxulub crater left by the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. It is a wound on the planet, a place of ancient, cosmic violence. But there is another, far more radical interpretation of the data. What if the anomaly is not the crater itself, but something within the crater? A gravity reading this significant implies a structure of incredible mass and size. Some have speculated that it could be the metallic remains of a vast underground complex, the foundations of a city so large it registers as a gravitational whisper through 3 miles of solid ice. Is it possible that a thriving civilization, knowing that a cataclysm was coming, built a final refuge in the bedrock of their continent, and that we are now detecting its faint, ghostly signature? It is a staggering thought, the idea of a structure so immense, so ancient, that its very presence can still be felt warping the fabric of spacetime around it. These clues, as strange as they are, would mean little in isolation. But they do not exist in a vacuum. In the last few decades, our entire understanding of the ancient world has been turned upside down. In Turkey, the discovery of a site called Göbekli Tepe has forced us to rip up the old timelines of human history. Here, more than 12,000 years ago, 7,000 years before the pyramids of Giza, so-called primitive hunter-gatherers erected a vast and sophisticated temple complex of megalithic pillars, covered in intricate carvings. This was supposed to be impossible. Civilization, we were taught, began with agriculture. But Göbekli Tepe proves that a highly organized, technologically capable, and astronomically aligned culture existed deep in the last ice age. This discovery coincides with a period of immense global turmoil known as the Younger Dryas, a mysterious 1,300-year cold snap that began abruptly around 12,800 years ago, plunging the world into chaos with catastrophic floods and extinctions. What if Göbekli Tepe is not the dawn of civilization, but a memory of one? A message from the survivors of a much older, more advanced global culture that was all but wiped out by this cataclysm. If such a seafaring civilization existed, where was its home? Where was the heartland of this lost mother culture, whose faint echoes appear in the impossible knowledge of the Piri Reis map? Perhaps its home was the only continent we have never thought to look. A land that, before the Younger Dryas and the Great Floods, was temperate and green. A land that was wiped from human memory when the cataclysm that shattered the world also froze it solid, entombing its secrets, and its cities, forever. The evidence is circumstantial. The clues are scattered. The geological timeline seems to forbid it. And yet, the questions remain. To try and answer them, we must be willing to step away from the safety of established fact and engage in a bold thought experiment. Let us, for a moment, assume the hypothesis is true. Let us imagine that before the ice came, a great civilization did indeed call Antarctica home. What would it have been like? Who were these people? And what was the nature of their world? Let us call them, for the sake of a narrative that has echoed through millennia, the Atlanteans of the South. Based on the clues of the maps, they were a maritime people. Their capital city may have been a great port, nestled in a vast bay on a coastline now buried under the Filchner ice shelf. Their society would have been built on the sea, their power projected by fleets of sophisticated ships capable of navigating the world's oceans. They would not have been isolated. They would have been the world's first true globalists, with outposts and colonies across the planet. This would explain the sudden, shared knowledge of pyramid building, megalithic construction, and astronomical alignments that seem to pop up, almost fully formed, in ancient Sumer, Egypt, and the Americas. They weren't independent inventions, they were legacies. This was a civilization of astronomers. They had to be. Living on a continent with months of endless daylight and months of perpetual night, the stars would not have been a casual curiosity, they would have been the central clockwork of their existence. Their temples, perhaps those very pyramidal structures we now see poking through the ice, would have been observatories, aligned to the solstices and equinoxes, charting the slow, patient dance of the cosmos. It was from this mastery of the heavens that their mastery of the seas was born. They could chart longitude and latitude. They could map the world. And they did. The Piri Reis and Orontius Phineas maps are not the originals, they are the degraded, misunderstood copies of a single, perfect world map, created by the Antarctic cartographers of a forgotten age. Their world was the pole, the still point of the turning world. They saw themselves as the guardians of a global balance, their continent the foundation stone of the earth. From their southern paradise, they watched the heavens and sailed the seas, a mother culture seeding the world with the first sparks of art, science, and philosophy. It's a breathtaking vision. And for a time, it was reality. But no world, no matter how advanced, is immune to the violent cycles of the cosmos. Their astronomers, watching the sky with an intimacy we have long since lost, would have been the first to see it coming. A shift in the stars. A wanderer from the outer darkness, set on a collision course with their world. Now, let us zoom out from this hypothetical empire and look at the world's oldest stories. Look at the myths that bubble up from the very dawn of human memory, from every inhabited continent. They are remarkably, stubbornly, the same. Nearly every culture has a memory of a great flood, a world-drowning deluge sent to punish mankind. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim builds an ark to survive. In the Bible, it is Noah. In ancient Greece, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha are the sole survivors. In the Andes, the god Viracocha saves two people to repopulate the earth. Hundreds of these stories exist, all telling of a global cataclysm by water. And after the waters recede, a second, equally persistent myth appears. The story of the civilizer gods. In Mesopotamia, the creature Oannes emerges from the sea to give the surviving people the gifts of writing, law, and agriculture. In Mexico, the bearded, pale-skinned god Quetzalcoatl arrives from the east, teaching the arts of civilization before sailing away, promising to one day return. In Peru, this same figure is called Viracocha, a wise teacher who appeared after the Great Flood. Are these just stories? Or are they the fragmented, mythologized memories of a single, real event? The memories of the survivors of the Antarctic cataclysm. Pale-skinned, bearded seafarers, their ships scattered across the globe by a world-ending tsunami, arriving on foreign shores as gods, carrying the last, fading embers of their lost world. Imagine the final days. An impact, perhaps, or a sudden, violent shift of the Earth's crust. The Antarctic continent is displaced. The intricate balance is broken. In a geological instant, the climate collapses. The temperate paradise is plunged into a Hyperborean winter. Rain turns to snow, and the snow never stops. The ice sheet, born in the highlands, begins to grow with terrifying speed, a silent, wet apocalypse, consuming forests, cities, and harbors, entombing an entire civilization in its frozen embrace. At the same time, this displacement of a continent shoves the world's oceans into motion. A wave of unimaginable height radiates outward from the pole, a truly global tsunami that scours the coastlines of every continent on Earth, wiping the slate of history clean. This was the Great Flood. This was the event that ended one world and began our own. The survivors, a handful of sailors on the high seas, could only watch in horror as their homeland vanished from the maps forever. All that was left of their great empire was memory. A memory that would become our myths. It is a story that captures the imagination like few others. A grand, epic narrative of a forgotten golden age, of a mother culture seeding the world with wisdom before being tragically erased by a global catastrophe. It's a story of genius and hubris, of cosmic cycles and lost knowledge. It explains the impossible maps, the strange anomalies, and the persistent myths of our ancestors. It gives us a grander, deeper, and more mysterious past than we ever thought possible. And we, as a species, are drawn to such stories. They resonate with a deep part of our collective consciousness that suspects there is more to our history than we have been told. But in any honest investigation, there comes a time when we must deliberately step back from the romance of the narrative. We must quiet the storyteller and invite the skeptic to the table. Because in the search for truth, the most compelling story is not always the truest one. The discipline of science, and indeed of history, is built upon a simple but powerful principle: extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And it is here, in the cold, hard light of evidence, that the beautiful vision of a lost Antarctic empire begins to dissolve. Let us return to those pyramids of ice and rock. From a satellite's cold, orbital perspective, the resemblance to the monuments of Giza is uncanny, almost undeniable. But if we descend from the heavens and ask a geologist, a person who reads the language of stone, a very different story emerges. These formations are a well-known, well-documented, and entirely natural feature of our planet. They are called glacial horns. The Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps is the most famous example in the world, a perfect, four-sided mountain peak carved not by human hands, but by the patient, relentless power of ice. When multiple glaciers flow down the different sides of a single mountain, they pluck and scour away the rock, carving deep bowls called cirques. Where these cirques meet, all that is left is a sharp, isolated peak. The geometry that seems so artificial is, in fact, an inevitable byproduct of erosion. The pyramids of Antarctica are not evidence of a lost civilization, they are monuments to the awesome power of the natural world. And what of the maps? Those impossible charts that seem to show a world that no 16th century explorer could have known. Here, we must turn to the historians of cartography, who have studied these documents for centuries. The Piri-Reis map, they argue, is not a chart of an ice-free Antarctica. It is, with almost complete certainty, a distorted representation of the South American coastline. Before the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century, calculating longitude was a matter of guesswork. Sailors could measure latitude accurately, but how far east or west they had traveled was a constant source of error. The Piri-Reis map shows the coast of Brazil accurately, but then, as it moves south, it bends sharply to the east, wrapping around the bottom of the vellum. It is a known coast, distorted by the technological limitations of the age, not an unknown one copied from a perfect source. The Orontius Phineas map is a different case, but it is also not what it seems. For 2,000 years, since the time of the ancient Greeks, geographers had operated under a philosophical assumption that a great southern landmass, Terra Australis Incognita, must exist to provide a symmetrical balance to the continents of the northern hemisphere. It was a purely theoretical idea. Orontius Phineas, a brilliant mathematician and mapmaker, was simply giving form to this ancient theory. His map was a work of brilliant speculation, not ancient knowledge. The rivers and mountain ranges he drew were not copied from a secret source, they were placed there because it was logical that a continent of that size would have them. The uncanny accuracy of its shape is a modern illusion, a case of us projecting our own knowledge of Antarctica onto a vague and theoretical drawing. But the most powerful argument against a lost Antarctic civilization is not found in what we see, but in what we don't. It is the argument from silence. For more than half a century, scientific teams from around the world have been drilling into the Antarctic ice, extracting cores that provide a perfect, layered timeline of the continent's history stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. In these frozen archives, we can see the ash from ancient volcanic eruptions, the dust from distant deserts, and the trapped bubbles of air from Earth's ancient atmosphere. But in all these miles of ice core, we have found no trace of a civilization. No sudden spike in methane from agriculture, no particulates of soot from the fires of cities, no microscopic evidence of metallurgy or mining. Nothing. Furthermore, there are parts of Antarctica, like the McMurdo Dry Valleys, that have been largely ice-free for thousands, and in some cases, millions of years. These are the places where, if a civilization had existed, we would be guaranteed to find its footprint. Yet despite decades of intense scientific study in these valleys, we have found no ruins, no foundations, no tombs, no pottery, not a single worked stone or discarded tool. There is a complete and total absence of the physical evidence that every human culture, no matter how small, leaves behind. The burden of proof must lie with the claim. And in this case, there is simply no proof to offer. The story is magnificent, but the evidence is non-existent. For now, the lost empire of Antarctica must remain where it has always been, a fascinating, and powerful, dream. So, in the end, it seems the verdict is in. The romance of the story gives way to the cold reason of geology and the stark, empty record of the ice. The pyramids are mountains carved by glaciers. The maps are elegant errors, products of brilliant guesswork and ancient theory, not a forgotten science. The silence from the ice cores is deafening. Based on every piece of verifiable, physical evidence that we currently possess, there was no lost empire. There was no Atlantean civilization at the pole. The great, green world of Antarctica died millions of years before the first flicker of human consciousness ever ignited on this planet. The stage was set, but the actors never arrived. The dream of a human history written on the southern continent must, for now, remain exactly that, a dream. And yet, to dismiss the entire journey as a fool's errand, to simply close the book and walk away, would be to miss the profound and humbling truth that the question itself reveals. The search for a lost Antarctic civilization, even if it leads to a dead end, forces us to confront a perspective that our day-to-day lives are designed to make us forget: the sheer, terrifying, and awesome scale of deep time. Our entire recorded history, from the first cuneiform tablet to the glowing screen you are watching now, is a paper-thin layer on the surface of our planet's story. We exist in a brief, warm interlude between ice ages, a fragile moment of climatic stability on a planet defined by violent and dramatic change. To contemplate a green Antarctica is to be reminded that the world we know is not a permanent state, it is a fleeting condition. The ice has come before, and the ice will come again. The true value of this quest is not in finding a lost civilization, but in recognizing the fragility and preciousness of our own. Because even if Antarctica was never home to a human empire, it is, without question, an empire of secrets. We have stripped away the myth, but the mystery, the true, scientific mystery, remains more profound than ever. We stand on the edge of a continent, and we see only a blank, white page. But that page is 3 miles thick. Beneath it lies 90% of the Earth's landmass that we have never seen. There are mountain ranges larger than the European Alps, canyons that would dwarf the Grand Canyon, and a network of hundreds of subglacial lakes, liquid bodies of water that have been sealed off from the outside world for millions of years. Think of that. Lake Vostok alone is one of the largest lakes on the planet, a body of water the size of Lake Ontario, buried under 2.5 miles of ice, its waters untouched by sunlight or the Earth's atmosphere for perhaps 15 million years. What forms of life, what unique evolutionary paths, might exist in that absolute darkness? The answers to the future of our own climate, the history of our planet's atmosphere, and perhaps even new frontiers of biology, are all locked away in that frozen vault. For more than half a century, we have cast our gaze outward, into the infinite darkness of space, and we have called it the final frontier. We spend billions of dollars and decades of our brightest minds listening for the faintest whisper of intelligence across the void of light years. We send our robotic emissaries on decade-long journeys to sift the red dust of a dead world for the fossilized remains of a single microbe. We look at the stars, and we are filled with a sense of wonder at what might be out there. And there is a nobility in that search. It is one of the grandest expressions of the human spirit. But all the while, we have lived on a planet that we have barely begun to understand. We have mapped the surface of Mars with a higher resolution than we have mapped our own ocean floor. We know more about the craters of the moon than we do about the bedrock of Antarctica. The greatest terra incognita of the 21st century is not on another planet. It is here. The final frontier is not above our heads, it is beneath our feet. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this journey is not an answer, but a realignment of our own sense of wonder. In the end, it may be that there was no lost empire. That the pyramids are just mountains, and the maps are just mistakes. But the question forces us to confront a humbling truth: our own civilization is just a fragile, fleeting moment in the immense timescale of our planet. We spend so much of our energy searching the stars for signs of intelligent life, hoping to find the ruins of a civilization on a distant world. But perhaps we should be looking down, not up. What if the greatest archaeological discovery in human history, the discovery that will redefine our place in the universe, isn't waiting for us in the cosmos, but is lying dormant, perfectly preserved, in the eternal silence beneath the Antarctic ice?